council members are present. Let the record reflect that all members are present, with the exception of Mr. Garrett, who's working to come in, and I believe Ms. Crawford is working double time today.
Mr. Mayor, if you could just do a roll call for the record, please.
Yes, sir. David Dickinson?
Here.
You say present.
Present.
Nathan Little?
Present.
Larry Bradley?
Present.
Wayne Adcock?
Present.
Ross Bradley?
Present.
Lee Malcolm? Lee, can we hear you?
Lee Malcolm, present.
Thank you. I do believe we have people coming in just a couple minutes.
60.
We'll say hello to. Before we move to the agenda, I want to thank you all for being here today. We have before us an unprecedented challenge, one that our country and city has never seen. The fight is on two fronts. Foremost assurances of the health and well-being of our fight to assist the businesses of Monroe as much as possible in this time of economic crisis. There are no words to be passed by the mayor and council that can immediately cure all the troubles facing our community from this pandemic. However, you've always impressed me with your adaptability, your creativity of thought, business acumen, and your love of Monroe. As always, we must rely on the wisdom, good judgment, and common sense of the people. Please heed the advice of the president, the governor, and the request of the council. Our intent in the measures before us today are to ensure safety and health and continue public services, but also ensure basic freedoms and liberties that are continued. Our many businesses are at a crucial time. They need your support now, whether through takeout food, online ordering, or gift cards for later. Throughout this challenge, we must remain calm and resilient. Remember how public interactions may affect one another in the future, and ensure that our neighbors in need and those most susceptible to this virus are well cared for physically and emotionally. I now need an approval of the agenda, please.
Move to approve.
I will move to approve by Mr. Ross.
Ross Bradley.
Okay, and a second?
Second.
Second.
Nathan Little.
Nathan Little.
I'd
Any
like
discussion?
an amendment to the agenda.
It's coming from Lee.
Ma'am?
Can you hear me? I need to make an amendment to the agenda.
Yes, ma'am.
Under new business, we need to add number 5 as curfew.
Okay,
Number 6, closures ordinance. Number 7, late fee and disconnections. Number 8 will then be other business.
okay. To approve the motion of the agenda as amended for Lee Malcolm. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Larry Bradley. Discussion.
Can we have a recap? Can we have a recap of what just happened?
Yes, sir. We moved from other businesses, number 5. We moved to impose the curfew for the city as number 5. Number 6 will be the ordinance to temporarily close certain establishments. Number 7 would be to extend no disconnections. And then number 8 would be would be other business. Is that correct?
Okay.
So
Thank you.
the amended motion's on the floor, and do I have a second? Larry Bradley, I'm sorry. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed, like sign? Motion carries. First item under new business is the ordinance to temporarily amend certain alcoholic beverages ordinance. Mr. Rosenthal?
Thank you, Mayor. I will read this ordinance for the mayor and council's consideration. This is an ordinance to temporarily amend certain alcoholic beverage ordinances of the city of Monroe, Georgia. The mayor and the council of the city of Monroe hereby ordain as follows. Whereas the World Health Organization has declared the novel coronavirus known as COVID-19 to be a world health emergency and pandemic. And whereas the President of the United States of America declared a national public health emergency on Friday, March 13th, 2020 regarding the same. And whereas the governor of the state of Georgia declared a public health state of emergency in Georgia on March 14th, 2020 regarding the same. And whereas the mayor and city council, as the governing body of the city of Monroe, and the city staff have been closely monitoring the constantly evolving COVID-19 national and state health emergency and pandemic, and taking appropriate measures to ensure the general health, welfare, safety, and health of the citizens of the city of Monroe. And whereas pursuant to City Charter Section 2.05, the mayor and city council shall hold a specially called meeting on March 26, 2020 to address the evolving pandemic. And whereas pursuant to City Charter Section 2.12, the mayor and the city council declare the pandemic to be an emergency situation, permitting this ordinance to be read and voted on at this meeting and not requiring reading at 2 meetings. And whereas the mayor and city council seek to make certain temporary ordinance amendments as further outlined herein to be effective for 90 days unless sooner terminated or extended in order to ensure the general welfare, health, and safety of the public and to help local businesses navigate through this pandemic. And whereas the following is an ordinance to temporarily amend the City of Monroe, Georgia Code of Ordinances regarding alcoholic beverages to permit the off-premises to-go sales of unopened beer and wine containers and to permit the use of growlers for beer sales by current beer and wine on-premises sales alcohol license holders. Now therefore be it ordained by the mayor and the council of the city of Monroe, Georgia, and it is hereby ordained by the authority thereof. Article 1. Notwithstanding the current provisions of Article 6 of the Code of Ordinances regarding alcohol sales, all on-premises beer and wine sales alcohol license holders in the city of Monroe, Georgia, licensed pursuant to the Code of Ordinances Section 685 et sequitur, are hereby permitted to sell unopened beer and wine containers to patrons for the purposes of said patrons partaking in off-premises consumption when accompanied by an order for takeout food. Further, said license holders are permitted to sell growler-sized portions of beer to patrons for off-premises consumption when accompanied by an order for takeout food. Said growler portion containers shall not exceed 60 fluid ounces per individual customer and must be contained in a properly sealed container. Article 2. Except as otherwise specifically required by law or by the terms of this ordinance, all other provisions of the City of Monroe, Georgia Code of Ordinances, Chapter 6 regarding alcoholic beverages shall remain in full force and effect, including but not limited to the exceptions regarding the sale of alcoholic beverages in the Monroe Historic Downtown Entertainment District, Section 636. Article 3. All City of Monroe ordinances or parts of ordinances in conflict herewith are expressly repealed for 90 days unless sooner terminated or extended in order to ensure the general welfare, health, and safety of the public. Article 4. This ordinance shall take effect immediately upon its adoption by the mayor and council of the city of Monroe, Georgia, and shall remain in effect for 90 days unless sooner terminated or extended in order to ensure the general welfare, health, and safety of the public. So read and adopted this 26th day of March, 2020. That is the ordinance, Mayor. And as noted in the ordinance, a second reading by your affirmative vote would be waived.
Thank you, Mr. Rosenthal. Are there any questions for Paul? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion.
Move to adopt the ordinance.
I have a move by Mr. Dickinson. Do you have a second?
Second. Wayne Hancock.
Mr. Hadcock? Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, like sign. Motion carries, that passes. Moving to ordinance to create a fund and create and fund the Downtown Development Authority Stabilization Fund of the DDA. Mr. Rosenthal?
Thank you, Mayor. This is an ordinance to create and fund the Downtown Development Authority Stabilization Fund of the Downtown Development Authority of the City of Monroe, Georgia. The mayor and the council of the City of Monroe hereby ordain as follows. Whereas the World Health Organization has declared the novel coronavirus known as COVID-19 to be a world health emergency and pandemic, and whereas the President of the United States has declared a national public health emergency on Friday, March 13th regarding the same, and whereas the governor of the state of Georgia declared a public health state of emergency in Georgia on March 14th regarding the same, and whereas the mayor and the council as the governing body of the City of Monroe and city staff have been closely monitoring the constantly evolving COVID-19 national and state health emergency and pandemic and taking appropriate measures to ensure the general welfare, health, and safety of the citizens of Monroe. And whereas pursuant to City Charter Section 205, the mayor and council shall hold this specially called meeting on March 26, 2020 to address the evolving pandemic. And whereas pursuant to City Charter Section 2.12, the mayor and city council declare the pandemic to be an emergency situation, permitting this instant ordinance to be read and voted on at the meeting and not requiring the reading at two meetings. And whereas the City of Monroe, Georgia Downtown Development Authority, the DDA, was established in 1985, and whereas the DDA has broad powers as granted by the state of Georgia enabling legislation found in OCGA 3642-1 et sequitur, and whereas the referenced enabling legislation of the DDA provides the DDA authority to have all powers necessary or convenient to carry out and effectuate the purposes and provisions of this chapter, including without limiting the generality of the foregoing, the power to perform a variety of functions, including but not limited to finance by loan, grant, lease, or otherwise, refinance, construct, erect, assemble, purchase, acquire, own, repair, remodel, renovate, rehabilitate, modify, maintain, extend, improve, install, sell, equip, expand, add to, operate, or manage projects, and to pay the cost of any project from the proceeds of revenue bonds, notes, or other obligations of the authority, or any other funds of the authority, or from any contributions or loans by persons, corporations, partnerships, or other entities, all of which the authority is authorized to receive, accept, and use, and to make application directly or indirectly to enter any federal, state, county, or municipal government or agency, or to any other source, whether public or private, for loans, grants, guarantees, or other financial assistance in furtherance of the authority's public purpose, and to accept and to use the same upon such terms and conditions as are prescribed by such federal, state, county, or municipal government agency or other source. Whereas the mayor and the city council seek to make certain policy decisions as further outlined herein due to the pandemic in order to ensure the general welfare, health, and safety of the public, including offering assistance to stabilize businesses located in the downtown area of Monroe. Now therefore be it ordained by the mayor and council of the City of Monroe, Georgia, and it is hereby ordained by the authority thereof. Article 1, the City of Monroe, Georgia Downtown Development Authority Stabilization Fund is hereby authorized, ordained, created, and funded by the mayor and the council for use, implementation, and administration by the DDA for the purpose of rendering assistance, stabilization, and support to downtown Monroe businesses experiencing an economic impact due to the ongoing and evolving pandemic. City staff is hereby instructed to transfer $100,000 from the Utility Capital Reserve Fund to the DDA to fund and establish the Stabilization Fund. The DDA shall undertake to adopt and document criteria and terms of qualification for a business receiving assistance from the Stabilization Fund and shall keep the mayor and city council apprised of actions taken pursuant to the authority and funds delineated herein. Article 2, except as otherwise specifically required by state law, the city charter, or the code of ordinances, all provisions governing the DDA shall remain in full force and effect, including but not limited to the terms contained in this ordinance regarding the Stabilization Fund. Article 3, this ordinance shall take effect immediately upon its adoption by the mayor and the council of the city of Monroe, Georgia, in order to ensure the general welfare, health, and safety of the public. So read and adopted this 26th day of March 2016. That is the ordinance, Mayor. And again, the same applies. Second reading is waived by an affirmative vote of the council.
Thank you, Mr. Rosenthal. Are there any questions for Paul?
Mayor, I'll make a motion we approve this.
You have a motion to approve, Mr. Ross Bradley?
Yes, sir.
Is there a second? I heard somebody. David?
David.
David Dickinson with the second. Is there any discussion?
Yes, I'd like, either Logan or Sadie, maybe. I know it, if I understand correctly, the DDA board will develop the criteria for this. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. We've got a program that we're working on to quickly administer these funds to get it in the hands of our small businesses as soon as we can. There will be some criteria, but of course that will be vetted by the Downtown Development Authority Board. Sadie, do you want to add anything?
Sadie's muted.
So do you want to add anything with a nod of the head, yes or no?
We'll be sure to.
So-
I'm unmuted now. Sorry. Yeah, we have been working on a draft of the application and the guidelines. The board, DDA board has given input. They're in favor of it. At this time, we're looking at one-time grants not to exceed $2,500 is the direction we're going. And then each business that applies would have to document their impact from the COVID-19 restrictions and give us a plan for how they'll use the stabilization funds and report back that plan, which we'll share with council as we go through this process.
Thank you. Are there any other? Hearing none, we have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Carried, that passes. Ordinance to temporarily increase the spending authority of the city administrator, Mr. Rosenthal.
Thank you, Mayor. This is an ordinance to temporarily increase the spending authority of the city administrator of the city of Monroe, Georgia. The mayor and the council of the city of Monroe hereby ordain as follows. Whereas the World Health Organization has declared the novel coronavirus known as COVID-19 to be a world health emergency and pandemic, and whereas the President of the United States has declared a national public emergency regarding the same, whereas the governor of the state of Georgia has declared a public health state of emergency in Georgia regarding the same, and whereas the mayor and the council have been closely monitoring the constantly evolving COVID-19 national and state health emergency and pandemic and taking appropriate measures to ensure the general welfare, health, and safety of the citizens of Monroe. And whereas pursuant to City Charter 205, the mayor and council are holding a specially called meeting on March 26, 2020 to address the evolving pandemic. And whereas pursuant to City Charter 2.12, the mayor and city council declare the pandemic to be an emergency situation, permitting this instant ordinance to be read and voted on at the meeting and not requiring reading at 2 meetings. And whereas the mayor and city council seek to make certain temporary ordinance amendments as further outlined herein effective for 90 days unless sooner terminated or extended in order to ensure the general welfare, health, and safety of the public. And whereas the mayor and city council are permitted to vest power and authority in a city administrator, including but not limited to duties of purchasing agent for all departments and coordinator and commissions of departments and general management of city business under direction and guidance of the mayor and city council pursuant to city charter section 2.12. And whereas the city administrator shall function as chief administrative officer of the city and is responsible to the mayor and city council for the proper administration of all affairs of the city, including contracting for the necessary operations of city services and performing such other duties as may be required by the mayor and city council consistent with the city charter, the code of ordinances, and applicable law, all pursuant to city code of ordinance section 2.1. And whereas the city administrator currently has a maximum purchasing cap limit of $10,000 pursuant to the enacted city purchasing policies, and whereas the mayor and city council wish to increase the city administrator's maximum purchasing cap limit to $100,000 to allow the city administrator to more effectively and efficiently manage the city's response to the ongoing pandemic, and any emergency actions or procurements needed to combat the ongoing pandemic. Now therefore be it ordained by the mayor and council of the city of Monroe, Georgia, and it is hereby ordained by the authority thereof. Article 1, the city administrator's current maximum purchasing cap limit of $10,000 existing pursuant to the enacted city purchasing policies is increased to $100,000 to allow the city administrator to make necessary purchases to accommodate the city's response to the pandemic and to ensure the general welfare, safety, and health of the public. Said purchases shall be made for any necessary emergency supplies, construction, or services to respond to the pandemic. A written determination of the basis for the emergency and for the selection of the particular contractor or supplies shall be included in the contract file, and this provision shall not abrogate the city's requirements as specified by state law. Purchases made pursuant to the city administrator's emergency purchasing power authority as granted herein shall be subject to ratification and approval by the mayor. Article 2, except as otherwise specifically required by state law or by the terms of this ordinance, all other provisions of the city administrator purchasing authority shall remain in full force and effect. Article 3, all city of Monroe ordinances or parts of ordinances in conflict herewith are expressly repealed for 90 days unless sooner terminated or extended in order to ensure the general welfare, health, and safety of the public. Article 4, this ordinance shall take effect immediately upon its adoption by the mayor and the council of the city of Monroe, Georgia, and shall remain in effect for 90 days unless sooner terminated or extended in order to ensure the general welfare, health, and safety of the public. So read and adopted this 26th day of March 2020. That is the ordinance, Mayor. And again, the same provision applies, waiving second reading upon affirmative vote of the mayor and council.
Thank you, Mr. Rosenthal. Are there any questions for Paul?
I would offer a motion.
Ma'am,
I would offer a motion to accept.
have a motion on the floor by Lee Malcolm. Approve. Second.
Second.
Ben Little.
Second. Yes.
Second by Nathan Little. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, like sign. Motion carries. That passes. Moving to the ordinance to temporarily modify certain personnel policies of the city of Monroe. Mr. Rosenthal.
Thank you, Mayor. This is an ordinance to temporarily modify certain personnel policies of the city of Monroe, Georgia. The mayor and the council of the city of Monroe hereby ordain as follows. Whereas the World Health Organization has declared COVID-19 to be a world health emergency and pandemic, and whereas the President of the United States has declared a national public health emergency regarding the same, whereas the governor of the state of Georgia has declared a public health state of emergency in Georgia regarding the same, and whereas the mayor and the council and the city staff have been closely monitoring the constantly evolving COVID-19 national and state health emergency and pandemic and taking appropriate measures to ensure the general welfare, health, and safety of the citizens of Monroe. And whereas pursuant to City Charter Section 205, the mayor and council shall hold a specially called meeting on March 26, 2020 to address the pandemic. And whereas pursuant to City Charter Section 212, the mayor and city council declare the pandemic to be an emergency situation, permitting this instant ordinance to be read and voted on at the meeting and not requiring reading at two meetings. And whereas the mayor and city council seek to make certain temporary ordinance amendments and amendments to the personnel and operational policies and procedures of the city of Monroe as further outlined herein, effective for 90 days unless sooner terminated or extended in order to ensure the general welfare, health, and safety of the public. And whereas the mayor and city council are permitted to vest power and authority in a city administrator, including but not limited to duties as coordinator and commissions of departments and general management of city business under direction and guidance of the mayor and city council pursuant to City Charter Section 210. And whereas the city administrator shall function as chief administrative officer of the city and is responsible to the mayor and city council for the proper administration of all affairs of the city, including assigning job priorities and work schedules as necessary and in accordance with the policies established by the mayor and city council, and otherwise direct day-to-day operations of the city, combining offices, positions, departments, or units of the city with the approval of the mayor and the city council, and performing such other duties as may be required by the mayor and city council consistent with the city charter, the code of ordinances, applicable law, all pursuant to City Code of Ordinance Section 2.1. And whereas the mayor and the city council wish for the city administrator as acting personnel administrator to redefine the city's reduction in force provisions in consultation with the city attorney, to approve updated work schedules and pay plans as needed, all in order to address the evolving city response to the pandemic. Now therefore be it ordained by the mayor and council of the city of Monroe, Georgia, and it is hereby ordained by the authority thereof. Article 1, the city administrator as acting personnel administrator shall be vested with full authority to redefine the city's reduction in force provisions in consultation with the city attorney, to approve updated work schedules and pay plans as needed, and to take other city personnel related actions as required in order to address the evolving city response to the pandemic. Article 2, all City of Monroe ordinances or parts of ordinances in conflict herewith are expressly repealed for 90 days unless sooner terminated or extended in order to ensure the general welfare, health, and safety of the public. Article 3, this ordinance shall take effect immediately upon its adoption by the mayor and council of the city of Monroe, Georgia, and shall remain in effect for 90 days unless sooner terminated or extended in order to ensure the general welfare, health, and safety of the public. So read and adopted this 26th day of March 2020. Again, Mayor, the same provision applies. No second reading is required upon an affirmative vote of the council.
Thank you, Mr. Rosenthal. Are there any questions for Paul? Hearing
Move
none,
to
I'll
approve.
have a motion to approve by Mr. Little. Do I have a second?
Second.
I'm gonna say that was Wayne, right?
Yes.
Wayne Adcock with the second. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, like sign. Motion carries, that passes. Moving to the fifth order of business, an ordinance to impose a curfew in the city of Monroe. Mr. Rosenthal?
Thank you, Mayor. This is an ordinance to impose a curfew in the city of Monroe, Georgia. The mayor and the council of the city of Monroe hereby ordain as follows. Whereas the World Health Organization has declared the novel coronavirus known as COVID-19 to be a world health emergency and pandemic, and whereas the President of the United States has declared a national public health emergency regarding the same, and whereas the Governor of the state of Georgia has declared a public health state of emergency in Georgia regarding the same, and has discussed a further order effective March 24th, 2020, banning gatherings of 10 or more people, and whereas the mayor and city council as governing body of the city of Monroe and city staff have been closely monitoring the constantly evolving COVID-19 national and state health emergency and pandemic and taking appropriate measures to ensure the general welfare, health, and safety of the citizens of the city of Monroe. And whereas pursuant to City Charter Section 2.05, the mayor and city council shall hold a specially called meeting on March 26, 2020 to address the evolving pandemic. And whereas pursuant to City Charter Section 2.12, the mayor and city council declare the pandemic to be an emergency situation, permitting this instant ordinance to be read and voted on at the meeting and not requiring reading at 2 meetings. And whereas the mayor and city council seek to make certain temporary ordinance amendments as further outlined herein effective for 30 days unless sooner terminated or extended in order to ensure the general welfare, health, and safety of the public. And whereas the mayor and the council seek to impose a mandatory curfew in the city of Monroe, Georgia, lasting daily from 10 p.m. until 5 a.m. Now, therefore, be it ordained by the mayor and the council of the city of Monroe, Georgia, and it is hereby ordained by the authority thereof. Article 1, there is imposed a mandatory curfew in the city of Monroe, Georgia, and individuals located in the city limits are asked to shelter in place daily from 10 p.m. until 5 a.m. from the date of the execution of this ordinance, effective for 30 days, unless sooner terminated or extended, in order to ensure the general welfare, health, and safety of the public, and to combat the expansion of the pandemic. Exceptions to this mandatory curfew are when an individual must run an emergency errand, when an individual is traveling to or returning directly from an activity involving the exercise of their First Amendment rights of free speech, freedom of assembly, or free exercise of religion, when an individual is engaged in interstate or intrastate travel through the city of Monroe, when an individual is walking, biking, running, or engaged in some other form of physical exercise and traveling to or from their residence for fitness purposes, when an individual is procuring food, medicine, or medical care, or when an individual is traveling directly from work to their place of residence or shelter. Article 2, except as otherwise specifically required by state law or by the terms of this ordinance, all other provisions of the city charter and the city code of ordinances shall remain in full force and effect. Article 3, all city of Monroe ordinances or parts of ordinances in conflict herewith are expressly repealed for 30 days unless sooner terminated or extended in order to ensure the general welfare, health, and safety of the public. Article 4, this ordinance shall take effect immediately upon its adoption by the mayor and the council of the city of Monroe, Georgia, and shall remain in effect for 30 days unless sooner terminated or extended in order to ensure the general welfare, health, and safety of the public. So read and adopted this 26th day of March 2020. And again, Mayor, the same provision applies. No second reading is required upon the affirmative vote of the mayor and council.
Thank you, Mr. Rosenthal. Are there any questions for Paul?
I have one, Mayor. In reference to people driving for the usual course and scope of their employment, such as delivery of food or delivery of medication, should we spell that out in this ordinance?
I believe that it already is spelled out in this ordinance, in that it speaks about procuring food, medicine, and medical care, or when they're traveling within the scope of their work. I mean, as you can see from the next ordinance that's coming down the line, we want to encourage deliveries, and we want to encourage to-go foods and those sort of things. So I don't believe there's any intent within this curfew to address folks who are conducting deliveries.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to make sure.
I'm not opposed to this ordinance at all, but I think we might explain the thinking behind the need for a curfew from 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. What will this accomplish for us?
Mr. Mayor, I have a question and a comment about it. I'm opposed to this idea of a curfew. I really don't see that we have an emergency that is to such an extent that we're essentially imposing martial law. I just don't get that. I mean, it's got a number of exceptions in it. It just seems overkill to me. You know, Athens, Clarke County enacted one of these things, and it's now being challenged in court. I just think this is overreach. I don't think we need to impose a curfew. And I think looking at it rationally, how is restricting what folks do between 10 p.m. and 5 a.m. going to make us more safe from the virus? This is the kind of thing you do when you've got situations where you've got
Safety.
riots in the street or something like that. I just think this is way, way too far. And I don't know how others feel, but I intend to vote against it.
Thank you, Mr. Dickinson. Are there any other questions or comments?
Oh, I agree with David 100%. I think our police probably already have enough to do because crime is already picking up around the city. I know in my neighborhood there are people breaking in cars at night, so they have enough to do without trying to enforce a curfew that and I don't know what good it'll do at this point in time in relationship to the pandemic.
Thank you, Mr. Edcott. Any other questions or comments?
By those that proposed it, what do they see as the advantages? I tend to agree with David and Wayne.
What we did, we had this under other business and we moved it, we amended it. It was an other business just in case. We wanted to be ready in case this was a route that you wanted to take. I do feel that your job, our job, is to ensure the freedoms of our populace, not to limit those freedoms. So I suppose I agree with David, but I do want as many questions or comments before we get to a motion. Is there anybody else?
I would share the same sentiment David mentioned. I don't understand exactly how this is going to protect the welfare of the people as concerning the virus.
Thank you, Ross. I appreciate it. Anybody else?
One comment from staff here. I think what the governor declared the other day throws a pretty good sized blanket over what we're trying to accomplish here. I'd like to also defer to Chief Watts if he has any statements that he would like to note on this item as well. If we could unmute Watts.
Whoa, we're racing.
Still muted. Wait a moment.
Is Conwell, there you go.
Thank you, Logan. I personally am in favor of the curfew. The reason why is you're right, our officers have enough to do already. One of the things we encountered this past weekend was a block party in the city of about 400 or 500 individuals that, because they are being sheltered at home in place, a lot of them think it's a time for them to congregate and get together. Like I said, about 400 or 500 people congregate. Not only does that expose them to one another, but it's also exposing our officers. We're doing due diligence over here to try to protect our officers from being exposed as much as possible to this and taking extreme measures to protect their safety, because we don't want this to impact our patrol force. I get it. Most people that are law-abiding citizens are going to abide by the rules and stay at home, but you do have a lot of them that's not, especially your younger generation. They're shrugging this thing off, which is unfortunate, but that's what we're dealing with.
Thank you, Chief. Are there any other questions or comments?
I had to come as the Chief Watts though. In the idea of limiting gatherings to 10 or less, same thing, it would affect that block party you talked about?
I'm sorry, Mr. Larry, can you repeat that?
Yeah, I think the governor said there should not be assemblies of more than 10 people.
Correct.
And your block party obviously was more than that. So is there a need for additional law or additional ordinance, or does the 10 or under cover it?
You want to add an additional ordinance for 10 and over? Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm sorry. I guess I'm not being clear. I think the governor's already said that from the state level, there should not be any gathering of 10 or more people.
Correct.
So in the instance you just described with the block party, that was obviously more than 10 people. So why would we need an additional ordinance to prevent that?
Well, I mean, you know, for me, the curfew is just giving us a little more legal authority to, when we see it congregating, to be able to disperse those individuals as they congregate together. I mean, we're faced with a lot of challenges on this. You know, and obviously you guys hold the ability to enforce it or not. I'm just trying to have a little more ground to stand on to be able to disperse these types of things when we start seeing them congregating together. And that's not the only first incident we've had.
Mr. Larry, if I can provide just some legal background on that. The executive order from the governor focuses on businesses and establishments and organizations not allowing more than 10 to gather. So I think that the technical problem that you would have is that the executive order addresses organizations, businesses. It's envisioning the businesses of gyms and movie theaters and churches and those sort of things. I don't know that even, unfortunately, this block party would be subjected to the terms of Governor Kemp's executive order from earlier this week, dated the 23rd of March.
Thank you for your clarity, Mr. Rosenthal. Are there any other questions or comments?
I'd just like to say that in light of what Chief Watts has just brought to our attention, I would respectfully ask that each council member reconsider their position, because I think it is our job to support our enforcement and our police officers, and in any way that we can make their jobs easier, certainly try to provide that direction.
Could I have a motion?
I'll just say, you know, I support the police department, but I still think that just goes too far. We're in difficult times in this city and state and country, but essentially going to a declaration of martial law for me is just a step too far. So
So do I have a motion? Do I have a motion to deny?
move to deny.
I have a motion by Mr. Dickinson to deny. Do I hear a second?
Second.
I have a second by Mr. Edcock. Any discussion? All in favor of the denial of this ordinance, please say aye.
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 I'm sorry, we're gonna have to do this one by one. Mr. Dickinson to approve, Mr. Edcock to approve. Do I hear any others? I have Mr. Little. Any others? Any opposed?
Aye.
Ms. Malcolm?
I'm hesitant to vote because I'm just hearing an explanation now that I've not heard before. I'm just concerned about casting a vote with this new information that just came out without time to give it more thought and discussion. I'm going to abstain at this point, I guess.
I think I'm missing a for or against by Mr. Ross Bradley.
Yes, sir, you are. I'm kind of with Larry. I fully support the police department, all their efforts, 100%. And it's the freedom and liberty part that's tough to stomach. So without tons of time to think on it fully, I would support David's motion at this point.
4-1.
Thank you. 4-1, motion passes for denial of the ordinance to impose a curfew. Moving to number 6, ordinance to temporarily close certain establishments in the city of Monroe due to COVID-19 pandemic. Mr. Rosenthal.
Thank you, Mayor. Before I read this ordinance, let me defer to Mr. Probst if he wants to address this one and provide some overview and discussion about it before I read the ordinance, since I know this one was late added to your agenda, Mayor and Council.
We brought about this ordinance late because we just wanted to make sure we were trying to regarding personal liberties and trying to get things in accordance to what the governor declared on Monday. Trying to be ready should we want to go to a closure type atmosphere. And basically what this is going to do is roll back certain provisions as to whether businesses are essential and non-essential. And I think the most impactful one here would be on restaurants. Longer doing in-house dining, but rather takeaway or curbside, something to that effect. That's probably the most impactful item on this ordinance right now. But again, I know you haven't had a lot of time to digest this. This is just something that's been floating around in the background, but we wanted to be ready in case you wanted to make any action on it today.
And I'll just provide a little bit more overview and then allow comment. The way this ordinance is drafted is it's drafted similar to several other cities and counties that have passed ordinances closing down gyms, fitness centers, theaters, bowling alleys, arcades, and other similar establishments where people congregate and gather together. It also closes all restaurants and food courts and eating establishments for in-house dining and even outdoor and patio service. It still allows for takeout or delivery or walk in and order or drive through, and then it exempts cafeterias that are in nursing homes and hospitals, and it has an effective date of 30 days. So it would be effective from today until roughly April the 25th of next month. That's how the ordinance is currently drafted.
Prior to moving to the reading, Paul, are there any questions or comments about what we're about to do or not do? I know this is probably the biggest point of the meeting, so I just wanted to get any commentary before he reads. Please proceed, Mr. Rosenthal.
Thank you, Mayor. This is an ordinance to temporarily close certain establishments in the city of Monroe, Georgia, due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Mayor and the council of the city of Monroe hereby ordain as follows. Whereas the World Health Organization has declared the novel coronavirus known as COVID-19 to be a world health emergency and pandemic, and whereas the President of the United States has declared a national public health emergency regarding the same, and whereas the governor of the state of Georgia has declared a public health state of emergency in Georgia regarding the same, and whereas the mayor and the city council, as the governing body of the city of Monroe and city staff, have been closely monitoring the constantly evolving COVID-19 national and state health emergency and pandemic and taking appropriate measures to ensure the general health, safety, and welfare of the citizens of Monroe. And whereas pursuant to City Charter Section 2.05, the mayor and the city council shall hold a specially called meeting on March 26, 2020 to address the evolving pandemic. And whereas pursuant to City Charter Section 2.12, the mayor and city council declare the pandemic to be an emergency situation, permitting this instant ordinance to be read and voted on at the meeting and not requiring the reading at 2 meetings. And whereas the confirmed cases of COVID-19 in Walton County and in the state of Georgia continue to rise, and whereas the mayor and the city council have the ability to exercise such powers as may be deemed necessary to promote and secure the safety and protection of the civilian populations during an emergency, and whereas the mayor and city council believe that it is necessary to temporarily close certain establishments where the public gathers and where social distancing recommendations cannot be maintained, to help slow the spread of COVID-19 and deter the pandemic in the city of Monroe, in order to help protect the health and safety of the residents and businesses of the city of Monroe. Now therefore be it ordained by the mayor and the council of the city of Monroe, Georgia, and it is hereby ordained by the authority thereof. Article 1, all gyms, fitness centers, fitness studios, theaters, live performance venues, bowling alleys, arcades, or other similar establishments within the city of Monroe shall be temporarily closed. All restaurants, food courts, and other eating establishments within the city of Monroe shall cease offering dine-in and/or outdoor patio service. Such eating establishments may continue to prepare and offer food to customers through delivery, takeout, and/or drive-through services. Cafeterias or on-site dining services in hospitals, nursing homes, assisted living facilities, or other similar facilities within the city of Monroe, following previously issued state and federal public health guidelines, shall not be subject to the closure requirements of this ordinance. The closures required by this ordinance shall remain in effect for 30 days unless sooner terminated or extended in order to ensure the general welfare, health, and safety of the public. Article 2, all City of Monroe ordinances or parts of ordinances in conflict herewith are expressly repealed for 30 days unless sooner terminated or extended in order to ensure the general welfare, health, and safety of the public. Article 3, this ordinance shall take effect immediately upon its adoption by the mayor and the council of the city of Monroe, Georgia, and shall remain in effect for 30 days unless sooner terminated or extended in order to ensure the general welfare, health, and safety of the public. So read and adopted this 26th day of March 2020, Mayor. That is the ordinance, and second reading by its adoption and affirmative vote of the mayor and council will waive that second reading.
Thank you, Mr. Rosenthal. Are there any questions for Paul? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion.
Motion to approve.
I have a motion to approve by Ms. Malcolm. Do I hear a second?
Second.
I have a second by Mr. Larry Bradley. Any discussion?
this ordinance just pertains to those businesses or those types of businesses mentioned in Article 1. Is that correct?
That is correct. Only the business types that are mentioned. Eating establishments, gyms, fitness centers, studios, theaters, live performance venues, bowling alleys, arcades, or other similar establishments, which would be basically public entertainment and exercise facilities and restaurants.
Thank you.
Do hear any more comments?
I wanted to note that the governor's order again has a lot of bearing on all of the other businesses that would be affected here. So we're just talking about, like Wayne just asked, just those businesses in Article 1 that would come under our purview for additional action.
And we have, right now, we've just done the Downtown Stabilization Fund. So businesses that would be required to shut down in the downtown corridor are going to get some help. We also have some businesses that would not be able to access that help that are downtown. And I will tell you that we have some of the highly trafficked, probably the more highly trafficked areas in town that this would preclude. So keep in mind, I don't know that that this ordinance really will have the impact that I think the authors of this ordinance would desire. So you'd be looking at grocery stores that have a mass amount of traffic. And even though they say the gathering of 10 people, not quite sure when you're on an aisle in a local grocery store that you're not going to run into 10 people. And I think it's going to have an adverse impact on the local businesses that actually have the need to stay open. I think our restaurants, well, I know our restaurants have watched their numbers decline by 80%, and they've gone to takeout curbside only, with one or two exceptions that I know of. And I believe they're moving that way as well. So do I have any other comments or questions?
I have a comment and a question. I'm not opposed to the ordinance. The 30-day time period, I do have some reservations about, but my thought is this: it can be repealed in less than 30 days. My question is, do we intend to meet for a regular meeting on April 8th? That would be, I think, the correct date.
2 weeks, approximately.
So, you know, if we're going to have a meeting in April, we could review it at that point. If the scientific data has changed and, you know, something else might be more appropriate. So
That's a good point.
yeah, because we just don't know. Like I say, I'm not opposed to.
And I would hope that if we do have that meeting, that we can revisit the ordinance that was denied in light of how things have progressed, and whether the parties of 10 have been abided by, and have Chief Watts report back to us on that.
True.
Thank you. I totally agree. And we'll make sure that's on the agenda, Ms. Malcolm.
Thank you.
Do I have any other questions or comments? Hearing none.
Does it, one other question, does this ordinance, I'm assuming it takes the governor's executive order further. Is that correct?
Yes, that's a fair statement. The governor's order specifically closes operations of bars, which we don't technically have in the city of Monroe.
Mm-hmm.
We have the Southern Brewing Brew House which most likely is affected by the governor's executive order. But the governor's executive order only limits the 10 persons when it comes to actual closures of businesses other than bars.
What does this do for retail shop? Do they just effectively need to close down, or?
It does not affect retail shops. The governor's order does affect retail shops from our reading and interpretation. I do think there's definitely some, and Mr. Councilman Dickinson mentioned the Athens-Clarke County lawsuit. I think that the governor's order does leave some room for interpretation. I think that Athens-Clarke counties did not, and basically did attempt to shut down all retail. The governor's order says that the businesses shall not allow more than 10 persons to be gathered at a single location if such gathering requires them to be standing or seated within 6 feet of any other person. So our interpretation of the governor's executive order, in light of this ordinance that you're currently considering, would not affect general retail operations as we know them, such as dress shops or dry goods stores within the city of Monroe, but they still are subject to the no more than 10 gathering social distancing requirement under the governor's March 23rd executive order.
So
What is our position in this ordinance, that retail would be allowed to operate with under the stipulation that no more than 10 per tenant inside the establishment at a time?
Yeah, this ordinance does not address retail establishments. Our ordinance does not address retail establishments.
Thank you.
okay, there's a little, I'm confused. If it doesn't address retail establishments, what about, I'm guessing gas stations are open. Were we to have a liquor store in town, that would be open.
Those are considered essential.
Well, even more so than that, Ms. Malcolm, all this ordinance addresses is gyms, fitness centers, fitness studios, theaters, live performance video venues, bowling alleys, arcades, and other similar establishments. So really the only other similar establishments would actually be an interpretation by Chief Code Enforcement Officer, Mr. Kelly, to determine whether or not those other similar establishments are in that vein. And essentially they are entertainment facilities and fitness facilities. He would have certain codes and classifications of businesses in his zoning ordinance that he would look to and say, well, that is one. So for instance, a jumpy house business, I know there's one trying to open up in Monroe, it's not opened up. That one would be affected by this ordinance. All gyms, all yoga studios, fitness studios, those sort of things are affected by this ordinance, and all restaurant establishments are affected by this ordinance. Another example of one that our office would interpret, because we discussed it, would be the country club. The country club's bar, by operation of the governor's executive order, should be closed. I'm assuming it is. This ordinance would require the country club's restaurant to close. However, it does not appear from our read that it would require the golf operations to close, but it would require the pool facility, although it may not be open currently, to be closed. So it's going to a recreation fitness establishment element, which we don't have a lot of, but we do have some here in the city of Monroe, and it's addressing restaurants.
Okay. So again, this to me, and your thought is most important, is limiting very few people's ability to earn a living. So we're putting a limit on a handful of establishments.
But we are protecting a great number of people.
I have a motion and a second on the floor. Is there any further discussion? Okay. The motion is to approve the ordinance to temporarily close certain establishments in the city of Monroe due to the COVID-19 pandemic. I have a motion by Ms. Malcolm, a second by Mr. Was that Larry Bradley or Ross Bradley?
Larry.
Larry. No further discussion. All in favor signify by saying aye. Actually, let's go through the by one if you don't mind, because this is confusing with voices on the screen. Ms. Malcolm approves.
Yes.
Mr. Larry Bradley,
Yes.
Mr. Ross Bradley,
Yes.
Mr. David Dickinson,
Yes.
Mr. Nathan Little,
Yes.
Mr. Wayne Adcock.
Yes.
Since that's 5, I'm not going to go any further, but if that was to say you are all in approval to approve the motion to basically shelter in place. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Well, clarify what you said, John. This is not saying shelter in place.
Correct. This is not a shelter-in-place
not at
ordinance.
all.
This is only an ordinance that closes the certain business establishments outlined in the ordinance for 30 days.
Thank you, Larry. Sorry for I appreciate the clarification. Ordinance to temporarily close certain establishments in the city due to the COVID-19 pandemic. All in favor of approval signify by saying aye.
No.
Opposed, like sign. Motion carries. Temporarily closing a limited number of establishments. Moving to the extending the no disconnections and waive late fees until April 30th. Mr. Probst.
Thank you, Mayor. We don't have an ordinance here before you on this, but currently we've administratively extended disconnections of through the end of the month. All right, there we go. All right, so we've currently extended through the end of the month utility disconnection. That's the end of this month, March. Some of you have requested that we discuss.
I'm sorry.
Some of you requested that we extend that through the end of April, and also a waiver of late fees through the end of April. That would be April 3rd. I'll welcome any other discussion on that, if that's a direction you'd like to move.
Is there any discussion?
I think that in light of everything, and I know from the standpoint of my business, I have seen the April 30th extension for many things. I would approve that.
So a motion?
I'll offer that motion.
Second. Ross Bradley, second.
Ross Bradley with a second. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
No.
All opposed, like sign. Motion carries. That passes. Moving to other business.
I'd like to just clarify something with Logan maybe. We had discussed the idea of during an emergency, if Logan's not able to do his job during an emergency, that who it would roll to, and if that person, who it would roll to. So the question is, I know we have something administratively, but do we need to pass an ordinance determining who would take over the role of city administrator in the event Logan was not unable to perform his duties during this emergency?
We can do that. I don't know that we need an ordinance, or we can just have you approve what we have as an internal policy document. That would currently that would roll the assistant city administrator, and then police chief, fire chief. But we can craft a full document on that if that is your wish.
That would be my wish, that I guess we formalize that process.
We'll take that into consideration. Is everybody in agreement with that?
And just basically spell out those assignments in the order that were given.
Do that, but
Assistant city administrator, police chief. Was that the order?
yeah, that, we can do that, or remember that, you know, by charter, all the department heads automatically report to you. So should there be a gap period where I'm incapacitated for whatever reason, it may not be necessary to immediately appoint an acting administrator. So just think about that angle as well.
Okay. Any other comments, questions about that? Is there any other business?
I do have one request.
Yes, ma'am.
And that is, could Logan please go over for the public the process when they feel the need to come to City Hall? Of course, it is closed, but how they would access information, whether it be drive-through or, of course, the phone number or the website. But it seems some people still feel the need to come to City Hall, and that is not accessible at this time.
We are closed to foot traffic. However, our drive-through is still open to drop off documents. Generally, these documents are done with customer service or the code office in advance, and cashiers down at the drive. Your utility payment that way. We prefer that everybody do as much online as possible through our website, monroega.com. And we also have the call center in operation, 770-267-3429. That's 24/7 that we have that call center operational, whether it be staff here or our after-hours call center. So as of now, we're still fully open for business, but as you can see, some people are teleworking for the moment, but we're still getting all the business taken care of that we need to do.
Are there any other questions or comments?
The only other one would be if you wanted to clarify, Logan, when the next council meeting is expected to occur and whether or not it is expected to occur in the same online teleconference format.
Thank you. At this time, we haven't discussed changing the meeting dates. I would expect as this drags on, we may utilize a similar format for the meeting. Otherwise, unless you all want to take some additional action and combine both meetings to the second meeting schedule, it'd be April 14th, I believe, if you wanted to combine those meetings. And by then we may be able to have an in-person meeting, or it could be teleconference again.
Is that something we would need to make a decision on right now, or we can just do it via?
That would be preferred if we could do it while we're meeting.
Okay.
Well, in light of the situation and circumstances and these ordinances that we passed today, I'd really like to encourage that we do have a teleconference for our called meeting work session, in order that it may be brief, but we could just revisit the effectiveness of these things.
I agree.
Are you pretty much in favor there?
So do I.
So would
Agree.
you like a motion to that effect?
A motion's not necessary.
Okay.
The mayor can still just keep with the pre-approved schedule for the called meeting to occur on April the 7th, and then they'll just send out notice with it being electronic or teleconference again. The only comment that I would make to that, Mayor and Council, just to give the public a heads up, generally there's not public comment at your called meetings, which would be April the 7th. But if the April the 14th meeting does still occur in a teleconference format like this one, then public comment will be available. but there will have to be certain protocols in place to be able to get people set up for public comment. And there will most likely need to be a deadline whereby those wishing to engage in public comment will have to notify the city IT staff, most likely the day before, April the 13th, in order for that public comment to occur if we end up having to have that April 14th meeting in a teleconference format. But we will post that information appropriately to our website and our social media outlets if that meeting needs to be conducted teleconferencing way.
Thank you, Mr. Rosenthal. So basically what I'm hearing is keep on keeping on with the regularly scheduled meeting. It may have a little bit of an amended format, and then move to the regular council meeting the following week. We'll have communications with the general public on how they can make their public comment. Is there anything else? Prior to accepting a motion to adjourn, I really want to thank you for all your patience and your input, and really especially want to thank Logan and Les Russell for their daily staying on top of this. I mean, minute by minute, we've met with Carl Morrow from the county, with the county officials, with the fellow mayors, with the Department of Public Health. Bruce Williamson has just been fantastic, and we've had a good bit of correspondence with our governor's office. So I want to thank everybody who's played a part in that, and appreciate your patience with me, because this has been a sun up to sundown kind of ordeal, and we're going to stay on top of this for our citizens, and I appreciate all of your being here today. Now, please, I need a motion to adjourn.
So move.
I have a motion by Mr. Nathan Little. Here, second.
Second.
Second, Mr. Ed Cock. Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Motion carries. Thank you, everybody. Have a good day. See you in a week or two.
Thank you.
Be safe.
You too.